United States military is making tremendous strides towards achieving our military objectives for Operation Epic Fury.
I know a lot I can't share with you, and I can't share with my constituents who want to know if their kids or spouses are going to be deployed and for how long.
This is Today As It Happened. Good Tuesday evening to you. I'm Andrew Rafferty here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day, from AI company Anthropic suing the Pentagon to negotiations on Capitol Hill over DHS funding and the war in Iran. But first, let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day. Two teenage brothers and champion mariachi players are now out of ICE custody. Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro posted a photo of the freed family last night. ICE had detained Antonio and Caleb Gamer Cuellar, along with their parents and a younger brother. Antonio and Caleb are a part of a Star High School mariachi band honored at the White House and U.S. Capitol just last year. DHS told us that the asylum-seeking family from Mexico no longer had legal status granted to them by the Biden administration after arriving in the U.S. in 2023. Their release follows an all-day push from multiple lawmakers, including a Republican who said the family was a valued part of their community. DHS has not yet responded to Scripps News questions about why they let the family go and whether they will still seek to deport them. And a special election to replace former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is underway. Almost 20 candidates are vying for her old seat. You may remember she retired from the chamber in January after a feud with President Trump. Today's special election is in a GOP heavy district in northern Georgia.
I mean, there's a lot going on in the world. I just want some more representation. I'm a Democrat, so I like to make my voice known in a very small Republican town.
Things are bad, and it's well past time. I mean, even in the local elections or the local Floyd County and Rome area, we've got extensive problems, and we need somebody to fix them.
And Republican Air Force veteran Clay Fuller has the president's endorsement. A top Democrat is retired Marine who took on Greene in 2024. If no candidate wins a majority of the vote, there will be a runoff next month. And the Wyoming governor has signed a fetal heartbeat abortion ban into law. The bill prohibits abortion once cardiac activity has been detected. If cardiac activity is detected, an abortion can only be performed in the case of a medical emergency, meaning if the life of the mother is in danger. The bill does not include exceptions for pregnancies as a result of rape or incest. And President Trump vowed that the U.S. will hit Iran 20 times harder than it already has if anything happens to block the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Scripps News senior international correspondent Jason Bellini has the latest from Tel Aviv.
Andrew, there's a waterway in the Persian Gulf the world built its modern economy around. 20% of the planet's oil flows through it every day. Statesmen have warned for decades that if the Strait of Hormuz ever closed for an extended period, the consequences would be historic. It's been closed for more than 10 days. The warnings were right. Economists are already using the words global recession. One analyst today called this the biggest energy crisis since the 1970s embargo, with Iranian leaders vowing to not allow 1 liter of oil to leave the Middle East until the U.S. and Israel cease attacking them. Blackmail, threatening to figuratively nuke the global economy.
We continue to strike the Iranian Navy and their capabilities in order to do things like sustain movement through the Straits of Hormuz.
Iran has struck at least half a dozen tankers since the war began, killing crew members, sinking vessels, and making clear that any ship attempting passage does so at its own risk. The giants of global shipping all suspending operations. Roughly 150 ships sit at anchor outside the strait right now, going nowhere. President Trump says the U.S. Navy will escort tankers if necessary. With Iran expressing no interest in negotiating, it's not a question of what's necessary, it's what would be sufficient. Andrew?
All right, Scripps News senior international correspondent Jason Bellini for us. Jason, thank you. A controversial change to an affordable housing bill in the Senate would restrict large build-to-rent investors. The Wall Street Journal reports the provision forces investors to sell single-family homes within 7 years of construction. The National Association of Realtors supports the plan to help home buyers, but build-to-rent industry groups argue it would choke financing and reduce supply, driving up prices instead. And the FAA has canceled a ground stop of all JetBlue flights after the airline requested the halt Tuesday morning. JetBlue cited a brief system outage that temporarily grounded its entire fleet. The company says it has now resumed normal operations after resolving the technical issue. And Starbucks is unveiling a revamped rewards program that has 3 new customer tiers. The levels are green, gold, and reserve, with special perks including free birthday treats and a free personalized reserve card. Starbucks says the changes will give customers better value, and customers will be notified of their tier status through email in the Starbucks app. Coming up on Today As It Happened.
As Anthropic alleges in its court documents, it is being retaliated against by the government for its decisions related to its expression and association rights.
Thanks for staying with us on Today As It Happened. I'm Andrew Rafferty with your daily look at the day's biggest stories. And the fight over how artificial intelligence should be used by the military is now playing out in court. AI company Anthropic is suing the Pentagon after being labeled a national security supply chain risk, a move that could prevent defense contractors from using its technology. This comes after the dispute between the Pentagon and Anthropic's CEO over how its product, Claude, could be used by the military. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett is live for us in Denver. So, Maura, what is Anthropic arguing in these lawsuits?
So, Andrew, Anthropic filed these 2 lawsuits, one in California federal court and another in federal appeals court in Washington, D.C. And basically, each case challenges different actions that the government took against the company, Anthropic says. The first lawsuit asks the judge to reverse the Pentagon's decision to label Anthropic as a supply chain risk. And that designation is significant because it was originally created to block foreign adversaries from accessing sensitive U.S. technology. Anthropic is arguing that this is the first time it's been used against a U.S. company. And then the second case challenges President Trump's order directing federal employees to stop using Anthropic's AI chatbot Claude across the board. And so in the complaint, Anthropic is arguing that the government is punishing the company for its speech and safety policies around AI. And so the key elements in these lawsuits are the arguments around the First Amendment and due process. If you take a look at this quote from the lawsuit, they directly write, these actions are unprecedented and unlawful. The Constitution does not allow the government to wield its enormous power to punish a company for its protected speech. Now, Anthropic argues that this move threatens a huge part of its business as well. The company says that it expected to bring in about $14 billion in revenue this year, much of it from the businesses and government agencies that were supposed to be using Claude for things like coding and automation. And we could see this dispute escalate even further, and what experts tell me it could implicate this litigation as well.
As Anthropic alleges in its court documents, it is being retaliated against by the government for its decisions related to its expression and association rights. There are also First Amendment implications for the government either forcing it to design its product a certain way, forcing it to carry or respond to certain content, as well as forcing it to potentially change its values.
Axios this morning reporting that the White House is considering an executive order that would formally require federal agencies to remove Anthropic's AI from all of their systems, though it's unclear when exactly that could happen, Andrew.
Yeah, and I know the case is being closely watched because it raises big questions about how much control AI companies have over how governments use their technologies. So what's at stake for some of these other companies?
In a short answer, a lot, right? And so ultimately, this comes down to if it applies to Anthropic, it could apply to any of the other AI companies in the U.S. There's also the question, I just spoke with the senior tech policy fellow at the Cato Institute, and she raised the point that if this is the kind of tension we're seeing when an AI company is standing up to its own government because it's saying, we're not ready to support what you're asking, what happens when foreign governments come in? And so all of that to be said, that's why we saw a wave of support almost immediately after the lawsuits were filed. Nearly 40 employees from OpenAI and Google, including Google's chief scientist and the head of its Gemini AI model, they filed what's known as an amicus brief, and in support of Anthropic. And they wrote in this brief that they argue that the government supply chain risk designation is, quote, improper retaliation that harms public interest. And so the brief also backs Anthropic's two major guardrails that they laid out around AI use. So if you remember, one that they took issue with that the Pentagon was reportedly asking for is limiting mass domestic surveillance powered by AI with no human oversight. And then the other is restricting fully autonomous lethal weapon systems. And so across the board, these other employees at other companies say that this raises major safety and ethical concerns. And the researchers went on to say that they're submitting the brief not on the behalf of their companies, but as individual AI experts who work directly with these systems, And they specifically said that today's frontier AI models have real risks. And ultimately, those risks require clear guardrails, whether that's protections or limits on how the technology can be used. But obviously, we know that we are way behind when it comes to regulation of this industry, Andrew.
Yeah, fascinating court case to watch play out. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett for us. Maura, thank you. A federal judge has ordered the government to explain why ICE detained a Nashville-based journalist for a Spanish-speaking news outlet. Attorneys for the woman say they worry she was retaliated against for reporting on ICE activity. ICE says she overstayed her visa. Scripps News Group investigative reporter Levi Ismail talked to her husband about what happened leading up to her being taken.
There's a sense of urgency in this home, hence the pacing and phone calls that just won't stop.
Everybody that knows her really cares about her. I think there's also a lot of reporters and a lot of journalists that feel passionate about one of their colleagues.
Nashville Noticias reporter Estefany Rodriguez hasn't been home since Wednesday, and while there's plenty of urgency to find out what happens next, her husband, Alejandro Medina III, is trying.
Sorry, I just got to see.
To practice patience.
I'll call her back. So we just dropped my stepdaughter off at the bus, and we got in the car. We were going to the gym.
Medina says the moment he parked this Nashville Noticias vehicle, ICE agents rushed over with guns drawn, searching for Rodriguez.
He's knocking on the window and he's saying, Estefany Rodriguez, you're here illegally, you gotta go.
Agents detained Rodriguez and told Medina he has nothing to worry about.
He says, I know you're a U.S. citizen. I know that she's your wife, and I know that y'all have pending green card application.
But that's just it. Medina told the agent his wife entered the country legally on a visa and was waiting on her asylum to be approved. Asylum she hoped to gain after fleeing Colombia, where she received threats for reporting on militant groups.
They make it seem like she missed 2 visits.
That first visit was scheduled for what turned out to be a massive ice storm in Nashville, which meant ICE offices were closed. Medina says they got a second letter to show up in March, but when he asked ICE days in advance, they couldn't find anything about a scheduled meeting.
We asked, well, do we need to worry about Wednesday? And they were like, I don't see why, not in the system.
Medina said that his attorneys asked him to double and even triple check with ICE officials before walking away.
Again, they just can't find this letter in the system. They can't find a date in the system that she's supposed to come in for a visit. They can't find any of that in their system.
Considering what happened next, Medina may not be all that surprised. Last he knew, his wife was transported to an ICE detention facility in Alabama. But shortly after this interview, he grew concerned after not spotting his wife's name in the ICE database.
I'm doing everything that I can to get her here as quickly as possible so we can finally go on a honeymoon,
The headlines here and across the country, even back in Colombia, have read that a Spanish-speaking journalist was detained by ICE.
My wife's a reporter that speaks Spanish and does the news, but my wife's mother, she's a really excellent wife, and she makes really good food, you know.
Medina knows people appreciate his wife's work reporting on tough issues like ICE and helping to keep her community informed. He also knows their honeymoon will once again have to wait as he waits on a call that can't come soon enough.
We're just going to keep doing everything in our power, you know.
Levi Ismail, Scripps News Group.
We'll be back in just a moment as we continue tracking today's top news. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories.
A search is on for suspects after a gunman opened fire at the U.S. consulate in Toronto, Canada. Police say 2 men in a white truck fired a number of shots at the consulate earlier this morning. The building was hit, but no one was hurt. Canada's public safety minister calling the shooting absolutely unacceptable. Today's attack follows the explosion of an improvised explosive device outside the U.S. Embassy in Oslo, Norway, early Sunday. Police announced the security would be stepped up at both the U.S. and Israeli consulates in that city. Gas prices continue to rise. AAA now saying the national average is $3.53 a gallon. That is 60 cents more than it was just this time last month. A Quinnipiac poll over the weekend revealing that 3/4 of you are concerned that the war with Iran is causing your oil and gas prices to rise. House Speaker Mike Johnson trying to quell those concerns today.
I think the mission is being achieved, is nearly completed, and the commander-in-chief himself said in the last 24 hours it will come to a close. So gas prices will readjust after that. You know, most of this is because the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed by the regime down there, but it will be reopened, and it will take a couple of weeks, but gas prices will come back down. This is a temporary blip in an extraordinary trend of a return to American energy dominance.
The latest now in the Epstein investigation. Jeffrey Epstein owned properties all over the United States and in France. All were searched during a number of investigations, save one, his Zorro Ranch in New Mexico. That is until now. State officials say they have now searched the property, did so on Monday as part of a new investigation. And Alex Miller joins us now. And Alex, this holds a whole new and potentially deadly twist to the investigation. What do we know about the search?
Well, Del, we know that this search was granted at the request of the Attorney General for the state of New Mexico, Raul Torres. Now, this was part of an investigation that they had been conducting in 2019, but was asked apparently by the federal government to step aside while they conducted their investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. But as you said, this property was never one of the ones that he owned that was searched. Now, the Department of Justice for New Mexico, want to make that distinction between the federal government and the state Department of Justice there. They are the ones who searched it, the state level, with cooperation with the sheriff's office and with the new owners of this property. Now, it is unclear, as you can see from these pictures, which parts of the ranch ended up being searched, whether it was the entire property or just certain pieces of it. But the state reopened this investigation last month. It does appear to be somewhat ongoing. The New Mexico Department of Justice is still asking people to stay away from the area and to not use drones in the area as they have this ongoing activity, Del. So this is just one piece of the puzzle that investigators are trying to put together into what happened at Zorro Ranch.
Alex, it's been at least 6 years, though, since Epstein was even on that property. Is it too late to get any real information from it?
I think that is really the big question here, not only because he hasn't been there. Obviously, he died in 2019, just shortly after he was arrested. We don't know when the last time he even was there really was. And there's new ownership. It was sold to a Texas comptroller in 2023. So there's already been new ownership for at least 2 going on 3 years. We do not know what they did to it, what happened between the time Epstein was last there and the time they bought it. That was about 4 years. So again, we don't know how much work has been done to the property. If there's anything specific that investigators were looking for, the layout could be completely different than it was when Jeffrey Epstein owned it. And so that is really the big question here. Likely they are looking for certain pieces to the puzzle. We saw Zorro Ranch mentioned a number of times in the Epstein files, both with accusations in particular that victims had been there, but also in Jeffrey Epstein's everyday business dealings, that he had people that were flying in and out to this property to discuss business deals as well. And so the Department of Justice for New Mexico, their state level, is asking for the public to contact them if they know anything specific about this ranch. Obviously, a lot of local people working at or near this ranch.
And this is where it could wind up getting even more controversial if that's possible. You've looked at state officials demanding to search the exterior of the lands, public lands connected to the property. Any updates on those searches?
Well, we know now that the New Mexico legislature has opened an investigation of their own. We're expecting an update on that at the end of July. They're likely looking at this public property as well. They're asking local people to come forward, and that could include former employees. And when I spoke to the New Mexico Land Commissioner a couple of weeks ago about this, she told me that there have already been people coming forward to her about that land surrounding Epstein's ranch there that say they have stories as well.
Scripps News senior national correspondent Alex Miller for us live in New York. Alex, thank you very much.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
If he does want to put us in a forever war, which it seems like he does, he needs to come out and let us be able to have this discussion. But take that gag order off us that they put on because we're in the Senator.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened, Scripps News end of day snapshot of our biggest stories. Let's pick up where we left off.
We're 25 days into the partial government shutdown. This week, delays at major airports leading to chaos for travelers. TSA workers are failing to show up for work, and they're required once again to work without pay. And that has led to long lines in airports in Houston and New Orleans. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen is live on Capitol Hill. And Stephanie, we are at war. That means it's more important to have Homeland Security funded, not just the TSA, but cybersecurity as well. Are lawmakers feeling that pressure now to get the funding issue taken care of?
Hey, Del, good afternoon. Well, Democrats and Republicans both agree that having the Department of Homeland Security fully up and running while we are actively at war is certainly where the country should be. But figuring out how to get there, figuring out how to find that compromise certainly still seems to be a big problem here. Republicans say they have sent Democrats an offer for funding DHS that has gone unanswered. They say that they are willing to sit down and negotiate anytime. Democrats giving a very different version of events, saying with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying that communication is constantly happening with the White House, but the Democrats putting the blame on the White House, saying that they're the ones that are not willing to budge and compromise. Republicans put the blame on Democrats, saying they're not responding, they're not willing to sit down and talk. We heard from Senator Schatz from Hawaii earlier today, and he admitted that on the issue of funding ICE and funding CBP, Customs and Border Protection, that the two sides are still very, very far apart. But he said Democrats actually don't want to be holding other agencies like TSA and cybersecurity, don't want to be holding those hostage while we're waiting to get everything else funded. Take a listen.
It is the Republicans that are blocking the reopening of these critical agencies. It is true that we are still far apart on the question of ICE. It is also true that there is no reason at all to hold TSA or the Coast Guard or FEMA hostage while our negotiations continue.
Obviously, cybersecurity falls under the jurisdiction of the Department of Homeland Security, border security. You can go right down the list. FEMA, these are agencies that have a profound impact on the safety and security of the American people. And the Democrats have opted to, in the most cynical way, play politics.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune has scheduled a procedural vote for later this week to vote again on an appropriations package for the Department of Homeland Security, what they called the most recent Republican offer to Democrats. But at least as things stand right now today, Del, it does not look like that procedural vote is going to be successful or really kind of move the needle at all to try to get some kind of compromise between the two sides.
Stephanie, before you go, Democrats are now vowing to shut down the Senate over the war in Iran. What are you hearing from them?
Well, Democrats just say they are not getting sufficient answers from the Trump administration, and they say the public needs more answers on what exactly is the end game. What's the goal in this war?
If there were to be a supplemental proposed, we would have to see the text before I would commit to doing anything. And this is the reason why we've been calling over and over again for them to come out of the classified briefings to allow us to have these conversations as much as we can.
I am a hard no on a supplemental. This is not a war the American people want us to engage in. This is not a war supported by this country, and this is not a war that makes us safer.
There was a classified closed-door briefing for the Senate Armed Services Committee earlier today. Democrats coming out of that hearing saying that they're not impressed with the answers they're getting from the Trump administration. They want more information on the costs of this war, as you were talking about with Jason. They want more information on what exactly the end game is. And as Senator Blumenthal explained to me earlier why he was so unsatisfied with what he heard this morning. What was it that was so unsatisfactory about the briefing this morning? Is it changing answers? Do they not have answers for the questions you have?
Unsatisfactory is the lack of answers, and certainly credible answers, that we deserve, and more important, the American people deserve. There seem to be more questions than answers, and a total lack of clarity. After a week of war about why 7 Americans have died in the service of this country.
Now, Senate Democrats have said that they are going to slow down or stop business on the Senate floor until they get public hearings. They want to hear Secretary of State Marco Rubio. They want to hear Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth come and testify publicly and answer questions about this war. What we don't know yet, Del, is exactly what type of slowdown or stall tactics the Democrats plan to employ on the Senate floor to try to push for public hearings. So we're definitely going to be keeping our eyes on that later this week.
Scripps News senior Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us on Capitol Hill. Stephanie, thank you very much. It is Election Day in Northwest Georgia, the special election to replace the seat once held by former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Close to 20 people now want to replace her. She retired from the chamber back in January after a very public feud with President Trump. Today's special election is in a GOP stronghold in northern Georgia.
I mean, there's a lot going on in the world. I just want some more representation. I'm a Democrat, so I like to make my voice known in a very small Republican town.
Things are bad, and it's well past time. I mean, even in the local elections or the local Floyd County and Rome area, we've got extensive problems, and we need somebody to fix them.
Republican Air Force vet Clay Fuller has the president's endorsement. The top Democrat, a retired Marine who took on Greene in 2024. If no candidate wins a majority, this man knows there will be a runoff next month, and he is Bill Crane, a Georgia political analyst. Okay, Bill, first question. Are we headed toward a runoff no matter what tonight?
Well, there are 22 candidates that originally entered this race, and after several of them dropped out in the last few weeks, we're down to 18. It is what we call a gang primary, meaning a special election with Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all on one ballot at the same time. So the math of that makes it very difficult for any one of those 18 candidates to get 50% plus a vote, a simple majority, which is the requirement in Georgia. The top contenders, and there's not a lot of public polling on this race, are, as you mentioned, Clay Fuller, a district attorney in a district part of the congressional district, State Senator Colton Moore, another Republican who's running roughly third or fourth, but is a favorite of a lot of strong Donald Trump MAGA supporters, and Sean Harris, who gave a very strong showing against Marjorie Taylor Greene 2 years ago, is a Democrat, former brigadier general, and has outraised and outspent all the other Republicans in this district combined. That said, it's a district that Donald Trump won 68-32 2 years ago. So there's going to be some shift. and I expect a runoff, but I think that runoff will be between the top vote getter on the GOP side and Sean Harris. And that ultimately, though there'll be some shift in a closer race, Mr. Harris probably has math against him winning the runoff a month from now.
Yeah, the Democrats will probably point out they missed it by that much. Let me ask you this. What does MAGA want these days? After all, there is that public feud between Marjorie Taylor Greene and the president. He claims he's MAGA. She claims she's MAGA. Who's MAGA? And what is MAGA these days?
Well, Make America Great movement, more than anything else, is something of a cult of personality about Donald Trump. I have friends in college and high school classmates who are either on the periphery or in the center of that movement. And in their eyes, in many ways, President Donald Trump can do no wrong. He can change his own mind about his own stated opinions on things like foreign wars. He can contradict himself in any number of policy areas and still engender their support. But that part of the Republican Party is shrinking. And the president enjoyed about 60% of independent voters in the 2024 election, and it was particularly critical for him in those 7 battleground states. The number for him now testing among independents is around 27%, meaning he's lost more than half of that vote. Makes it very difficult to see a great election day pattern in midterms in November for the GOP, given again that another member of the GOP in California today is leaving the party and becoming independent in a chamber of the U.S. House where their majority is only 3 votes.
Do the Democrats stand any chance in what, as you point out, is a ruby red, and I mean ruby red district in Georgia?
Sean Harris is a strong candidate and is well regarded by a number of voters there. The Democratic threshold, I guess you'd say ceiling, in that district for the better part of a decade now has been 35 to 40%. He got 34% in the last election. I think he'll better that number, and he may even break 40%. I don't see the district shifting sufficiently in what will be a lower turnout special election to flip that result. I expect it'll be a 55-45 with Mr. Harris coming up short, and most likely that's the Trump endorsee Clay Fuller who wins that race.
Hey, Bill, I don't know if you heard the gentleman that we interviewed in the beginning of the segment, but he said somebody's got to fix things. And what he's talking about are the affordability issues. We're talking about gas prices that are up 60 cents in just the last week. We're at war. This is a party that said they didn't want to go to war, forever wars. The president campaigned on ending forever wars. Is there a chance that there could be an open rebellion in that part of Georgia?
It's certainly possible. I mean, we saw in Barack Obama in the 2010 congressional midterms over the Affordable Care Act lose both chambers of Congress. We saw Joe Biden 2 years into his presidency lose both chambers of Congress. Midterms are tough on the party in power as a general rule. This president has made any number of controversial decisions, or at least the way he's moved forward on his policy, that have offended a number of Americans. So I don't expect the GOP is going to be smiling at the end of that election day. But this district, North Georgia in general, I think will stay safely Republican. Metro Atlanta is getting decidedly more Democratic. So when we get to the general election in the fall, we have 10 million voters, 10 million people of age, 8.5 million registered voters, probably 4 million, maybe 5 of those will actually vote in the fall. It's possible that some of our constitutional offices and one, maybe 2 congressional districts will flip. But I think on balance, Georgia will still be a conservative and red state.
Bill, final question before I let you go. Is this the last ride of Marjorie Taylor Greene?
She says she is not going to seek public office again. I have a hard time believing that because she seemed to enjoy the sport so much. But I don't think we've seen the last of her. Where that manifests, whether she runs for a state office, whether she shows up on a television show as a pundit for somebody like Scripps or Nexstar, or even as a semi-permanent rotation here on The View, I think we have not seen the last of her. She's a very effective business person, which is the side most of us don't see. And that's the way I met her, running a company called Taylor Construction. I don't think she's going to go move back home and run that company.
There's always punditry. Georgia political analyst Bill Crane. Bill, thanks for being with us.
Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
It's the tornado risk that's mainly driving the severe outlook up in the lower Great Lakes today. This is really the zone to watch, not just for a few tornadoes, but some of those could be on the stronger side as well.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Andrew Rafferty. Let's jump right back into our rundown of the top stories of the day.
Home sales ticking up a bit in February. Shoppers taking advantage of mortgage rates dipping below 6%. First time since 2022. There was also a slight increase of homes up for sale. Also, the prices of those homes, median price now just shy of $400,000. Forecasters telling people from Texas to Illinois to brace for possible tornadoes. On top of that, there is a threat of major thunderstorms, wind damage, and hail. Caleb Chevalier from our Scripps News Group in Kansas City is tracking this mega storm. And Caleb, it's spring across the United States. I have worked where you are. In fact, my first tornado was covered in Kansas City. So when are these concerned tornadoes going to crop up, and how concerned are you that they're going to be pretty bad?
There are parts of the country where I think we do need to be focusing in on concern for not just tornadoes this evening, but some potent ones as well. This is the latest from the Storm Prediction Center, and their severe risk map does indeed take into effect a large part of the country. You can talk in these in terms of the words that Storm Prediction Center uses. For example, yellow is the slight risk, then you go up to enhanced risk in the orange, or moderate in the red. You can also think of them as threat levels out of 5. This would be level 2 in the yellow, level 3 in orange, up to level 4 in the moderate. 5 is something that only gets issued typically once or twice a year. Now, there's already a tornado watch issued for parts of central Texas, and they're, yes, anticipating maybe a few tornadoes, but hail is going to be the big driver for the severe weather down there today. The watch has text in there saying they could be looking at 4-inch plus hailstones. And then it's the tornado risk that's mainly driving the severe outlook up in the lower Great Lakes today. This is really the zone to watch, not just for a few tornadoes, but some of those could be on the stronger side as well. Hence, you've got the moderate risk or level 4 from Peoria and Bloomington over to Kankakee and getting up into parts of northwest Indiana, and then enhanced risk surrounding that. Hail could certainly be part of that as well, but as we kind of look at a simulated picture into the future of what the radar and cloud cover might look like, we'll have to watch any cells south of a warm front that has set up. That would allow tornadic potential. Cells north of that warm front into maybe Chicago and the Great Lakes could still be hail producers, but you got to be in that warmer air to find the tornado potential. That's true as well down to Kansas City and into Missouri. Cells popping out by 7 p.m. could certainly be a possibility. Anything along or ahead of that front is going to be having a little bit more of that tornadic potential. Hailstones, I think, are going to be the primary thing Kansas City will look for later, as well as Missouri, and then deep into tonight. Here we go, and it looks like a lot of rain. Yes, kind of a mess, but even some isolated severe storms into parts of the Ohio Valley cannot be ruled out. I'll tell you one thing, Del, Illinois is going to be the place to be for storm chasers today. It's flat terrain, it's good for chasing, and we're early in the season. A lot of chasers out there are going to be itching to see some of their first potential of the year.
Hey, Caleb, there was an article in this week's Washington Post that seemed to indicate that this season could be worse and more severe than past seasons. How concerned should people be? And you talked about the tornadoes. We don't focus enough on the hailstorms. They are deadly where you are.
They really are. And it is, I think, a little bit too early to get into prognostications about the severe weather season upcoming versus last. I will say 2024 was a barn burner, had close to a record amount of tornadoes in a year for the United States, I believe. But yes, hail doesn't maybe get some of the necessary headlines that it should. Hail's going to be a big driver down there in Texas, and for those folks, it's a little more common. They expect the big hailstones, but for the Midwest, in early March, and we're talking about large hail potentially from Michigan down into parts of Kansas. Again, not something that's usually topical, but needs to be on the mind of many because it's a threat to life and property as well. Meteorologists up and down this area are going to be watching that very closely tonight.
Caleb Chevalier from our Scripps News Group in Kansas City. Caleb, thank you very much.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
America's war with Iran is intensifying. I'm Haley Bull at the White House. Coming up, the mixed messages President Trump is sending about when it could come to an end.
You're watching Today As It Happened, Scripps News Rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. Let's dive right back in.
It is day 11 of the war with Iran. Today, the Pentagon telling us that 140 U.S. service members have now been injured, 8 of them severely. 108, they say, have already returned to duty. 7 U.S. troops, though, have died, one of them dying from injuries on the first day of the war. You, the taxpayers, footing the big chunk of the war. The first cost so far, $5 billion in munitions. That is the number the Pentagon telling Congress. That does not include, by the way, other related expenses. Trump administration now saying it may ask Congress for more money to pay for the war, but several lawmakers have already said that is a no-go. The Trump administration continues to claim it is winning its war with Iran. There are growing questions about the future of that war, and 11 days later, just how long it might last. Our senior White House correspondent Haley Bull joins us live now from the North Lawn. And Haley, the shifting narrative continues to evolve. Senator Richard Blumenthal telling our Stephanie Lieberman on Capitol Hill today he still doesn't have a concrete answer. What is the administration now saying?
Well, Del, the White House is saying that it ends when President Trump determines they've met their military objectives, which they are describing in the same manner as they did at the outset, and when Iran unconditionally surrenders. But the administration is continuing to face questions on just how long these operations could last.
America's war with Iran intensifying in its second week. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Tuesday would be the most intense day of strikes inside the country.
The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes.
Meanwhile, the White House has sent mixed messages about how long the war could last. On Monday, President Trump suggested the war was near complete, but he also said this.
We've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough.
Secretary Hegseth now emphasizing a looser timeline determined by the president.
Our will is endless. Ultimately, the president gets to determine the end state of those objectives. It's not for me to posit whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end. That's his.
In a statement Monday, Iran's leadership said it would determine the end of the war. Back home, the reality of war is becoming more apparent. On Monday, the body of the 7th U.S. service member killed in action during the war, 26-year-old Staff Sergeant Benjamin Pennington, was brought back to the U.S.
To the families and the families of all of our fallen, we share in your profound grief.
And the economic impact on Americans is growing. The average price for a gallon of regular gas on Tuesday, $3.54, up more than 55 cents from before the war.
I couldn't afford to fill up my tank. I'm on Social Security. I can't afford this.
Nearly 3 in 4 voters say they're concerned the war will continue to cause oil and gas prices to rise, according to a recent Quinnipiac poll. And 57% of voters say they disapprove of President Trump's handling of the situation with Iran.
And Del, the energy market is continuing to keep an eye on the Strait of Hormuz, where a fifth of the global oil supply normally passes through. The White House calling increases to gas prices temporary. Meanwhile, it also says the president will tout his economic policies in Ohio and Kentucky this week.
Haley, another point of confusion. The Energy Secretary posting that a U.S. Navy ship escorted a tanker in the Strait, and then that post was deleted. What do we know about that?
Well, the White House says the U.S. Navy has not escorted tankers at this time, though it is offered to. We are hearing more about that post. According to a Department of Energy spokesperson, that video was deleted after the spokesperson says it was determined it was incorrectly captioned by Department of Energy staff. We are also told that their teams are monitoring the situation, saying they are, quote, speaking with industry leaders and having the U.S. military draw up additional options to keep the Strait of Hormuz open.
I'm Andrew Rafferty. Have an excellent Tuesday night.